Maple Grove was, on the surface, a calm suburban enclave. Located on the outskirts of a mid-sized American city, it featured winding streets lined with identical ranch-style houses and compact two-story homes. Each had a well-tended lawn, tidy flower beds, and a sense of uniformity prized by the local homeowners association, HOA. Neighbors waved in passing and sometimes chatted on their driveways, but deeper friendships were rare. People mostly kept to themselves, satisfied with the safe, orderly environment. Near the center of Maple Grove sat a small man-made pond encircled by a narrow walking trail. Children would ride scooters there, dog owners strolled with leashed companions, and seniors in the community used the paved path for daily exercise. A cluster of benches overlooked the water, offering a tranquil view of ducks and geese that occasionally waddled ashore. On the other side of the pond, the terrain sloped gently upward, leading to a cul-de-sac of newer houses. It was a beautiful area, and residents enjoyed the small slice of nature. However, Maple Grove was also home to an especially officious HOA. Residents joked, only half in jest, that you needed approval just to change a porch light bulb. Chief among the rule enforcers was Valerie Jefferson, a woman in her late 50s who had recently risen to a position of influence on the HOA board. Valerie's eagle-eyed vigilance was legendary. She had once penalized a homeowner for planting a rosebush that didn't match the designated color palette. Another time, she stirred an uproar over a child's basketball hoop left at the curb too many days in a row. The neighbors, in exasperation, referred to her by a mocking nickname, Karen. Valerie insisted she was preserving the pristine standards of Maple Grove, but most saw it differently. To them, she was a petty tyrant. Still, few had dared to challenge her openly. They submitted to the HOA's intricate rules, hoping to avoid confrontation. But unbeknownst to everyone, a bigger conflict was brewing, one that would push Valerie's controlling nature to its limit. A new resident, Shannon Lee, had recently moved into a bungalow at the northern edge of Maple Grove. Shannon used a wheelchair after a car accident left her legs partially paralyzed. Yet she was fiercely independent, determined to live life on her own terms. She'd chosen Maple Grove for its quiet streets and level sidewalks, believing it would suit her mobility needs. Little did she know she would soon collide with the HOA's self-appointed enforcer. Shannon's bungalow sat on a gently sloping hill. Each morning, she rolled down her driveway, made a left turn onto Maple Grove Lane, and continued several blocks to the community mail kiosk and pond walkway. The path meandered around the water, eventually connecting to the main road near the neighborhood's entrance. For Shannon, it was a pleasant route, giving her a chance to see the ducks and breathe fresh air. However, Shannon soon discovered a more direct way, a small strip of grass that cut behind Valerie Jefferson's property and intersected with the pond path. This shortcut saved Shannon about 3 or 4 minutes of navigating sidewalks and curbs. After verifying that the land was indeed a common area and not someone's private yard, as far as the official maps indicated, Shannon decided to use the grassy route. It was mostly level and wide enough for her wheelchair, though occasionally she had to be cautious about low spots or damp patches. Still, it was quicker and more enjoyable. She could wave to passing neighbors on the walking trail. The first time Valerie saw Shannon crossing that grassy strip near her backyard fence, she immediately bristled. She was pruning her rose bushes when Shannon's wheelchair emerged from behind the fence line. Valerie set down her shears, marched to the fence, and peered over. "Excuse me," Valerie called out in a tone that suggested anything but courtesy. "Why are you in this area? This is not a public thoroughfare." Shannon paused, looking up, startled. "Oh, I'm sorry," she began. "Is this your private property? I checked the community map, and it looked like an easement or HOA-owned land." Valerie narrowed her eyes. "It's near my property, and I don't appreciate people cutting through. That land belongs to the HOA, but it's not designated for foot," she caught herself, "or wheelchair traffic." Shannon frowned. "I see, but the map showed it was common space, and it's a simple shortcut to the pond path. It's safer than going all the way around with the traffic." Valerie huffed. "Common space is for scenic value, not for unofficial pathways. Besides, you might damage the grass or cause ruts. I'll have to check the guidelines." Shannon, trying to stay polite, offered a small nod. "All right, if it's truly not allowed, let me know which rule states that. I'll adjust my route if I have to, but I hope we can find a compromise." With that, she continued onward, leaving a clearly irked Valerie behind. The next day, Shannon used the path again, thinking perhaps Valerie had simply been having a bad afternoon. But once more, she sensed disapproval radiating from behind the fence. Valerie appeared, scowling in silence this time, arms folded. Shannon briefly waved, unsure whether to expect a wave back. None came. Little did Shannon realize that Valerie had already begun scouring the HOA rulebook, searching for any regulation that might forbid crossing that particular patch of grass. If she couldn't find a direct ban, she might interpret a general clause to suit her agenda. After all, to Valerie, letting one person, especially someone new, carve out an unofficial route through her domain spelled chaos. Days turned into weeks. Shannon continued using her shortcut, citing safety and convenience. Meanwhile, Valerie simmered with mounting resentment. She sent emails to the other HOA board members, complaining about an unregulated path forming near her yard. Wheelchair tracks in the grass, one message read, indicate repeated usage, risking damage and mud ruts. This is an eyesore and a liability. The board's response was lukewarm. Most members seemed uninterested in fueling a quarrel over a piece of grass. In truth, many of Maple Grove's regulations centered on structural modifications, landscaping uniformity, or parking limitations. Nothing specifically about crossing a small patch of land that was technically communal property. One board member, Derek Simpson, gently reminded Valerie that the land was indeed an HOA easement, not her private yard. We can't ban a resident from crossing it, he said. If it's not harming anything or anyone, let's leave it alone. Valerie found that response wholly unsatisfying. If the official rules wouldn't back her, she reasoned she might resort to other tactics. She posted signs on her fence, reading, "No unauthorized access," and "Private, keep out." In truth, they had no legal standing, since that slice of land wasn't entirely hers. Shannon, upon seeing the signs, hesitated but continued through. She was well within her rights, as far as the official map and the board's own statements. One late afternoon, Valerie confronted Shannon more forcefully. Shannon had just exited the pond path, rolling across the grass toward the gap behind the fence. Valerie appeared, flinging open her back gate and marching directly into Shannon's path, effectively blocking her. "Stop," Valerie ordered. "I told you this isn't a thoroughfare. Why must you ignore the signs?" Shannon's voice remained calm, though her heart pounded. "Because it's common land, and the HOA said I'm allowed. I need to be able to get to the path safely. If you have a real complaint, please bring it to the board so we can discuss a solution. But I won't risk my safety by wheeling on busy streets if there's a simpler route." Valerie glared, fists clenched at her sides. "You're tearing up the turf. Look at these wheel marks." Shannon glanced down. Indeed, faint tracks in the grass were visible, but not deep ruts, more like lines that would vanish after the next rainfall. "It's just grass," Shannon said gently. "It'll bounce back. And if you're worried, I can reduce how frequently I pass here. But this is the best way for me." Valerie's lips tightened. "We'll see about that," she snapped, stepping aside reluctantly. Shannon rolled past, unsettled by the hostility radiating from Valerie's gaze. That evening, Shannon confided in a neighbor she'd befriended, Lucy Ramirez, whose backyard also bordered the pond. "Am I being unreasonable?" Shannon asked, detailing the confrontation. Lucy shook her head. "No, Valerie's the one being unreasonable. She acts like she owns everything around here. Don't let her bully you." But Shannon couldn't shake the worry that Valerie might escalate. The tension was palpable. Each day, Shannon wondered if she'd find the path barricaded or confronted by an even more aggressive Valerie. She tried to remain optimistic, trusting that logic and fairness would prevail. Little did she know, Valerie's next move would be far more drastic than petty signs or angry words. Valerie simmered over the next week, her frustration intensifying every time she spotted Shannon's wheelchair crossing that stretch of grass. The faint tracks seemed to mock her powerlessness. She typed up complaint after complaint, but the HOA board politely dismissed them, pointing out they had no grounds to forbid Shannon's passage. The prevailing view was that, until an official rule said otherwise, Shannon had as much right to cross that easement as anyone else. Unable to rally the HOA to her cause, Valerie mulled over a drastic idea. She told herself she was only defending her property's perimeter, that someone in a wheelchair has no right to tear up the grass. Yet deep down, she knew it was malicious, a plan to create a hazard that would stop Shannon from crossing. On a mild Saturday evening, under the guise of doing yard work, Valerie dragged a box of empty glass bottles out near the fence. As twilight fell, she donned gloves and methodically smashed the bottles against each other, scattering sharp shards across the portion of grass that Shannon typically traversed. She spread them so they formed a near-invisible minefield of glass slivers, hidden beneath the dim light. She felt a wave of grim satisfaction. If Shannon tried to wheel through, the shards might embed themselves in her tires or pose a serious risk. Perhaps that would be enough to discourage her once and for all. But once she finished, a surge of guilt briefly washed over Valerie. She glanced around nervously, worrying a neighbor might have seen. The hush of the early night weighed on her. She gathered the remaining large bottle fragments into a trash bag, leaving only the smaller, harder-to-see shards behind. Then she retreated into her house, closing the curtains. She rationalized that Shannon would just learn to stay away. In her mind, the end justified the means. Valerie's plan, however, had an unexpected witness. Mr. Pellman, an older man who lived a few houses down, happened to be out for an evening stroll around the pond. He caught a glimpse of someone smashing glass near the fence. Stunned, he quickened his step to see more, but by the time he reached the area, the figure had vanished. In the faint glow of a distant streetlight, he spotted glints on the grass, realized it was broken glass, and shook his head in disbelief. He suspected it was Valerie, but had no conclusive evidence. Unsure what to do, he decided to warn Shannon in the morning, hoping to prevent an accident. Sunday morning dawned bright and mild. Shannon rose early, planning to take her usual route to the pond for a quick roll in the fresh air. She had no idea what Valerie had done overnight. As she approached the short stretch of grass behind Valerie's fence, she was surprised to see Mr. Pellman waiting at the edge of the pond path, waving to get her attention. Shannon slowed her wheelchair. "Good morning, Mr. Pellman. Is something wrong?" The elderly man wore a troubled look. "I'm afraid so, dear. I was walking last night and saw someone smashing glass. I think there's broken glass all over your shortcut." Shannon's eyes widened. "What? You're sure?" He nodded gravely. "Yes, I saw it shining in the moonlight. I tried to check more closely, but it was quite dark. I was worried you might come through and get a flat tire or worse." A pit formed in Shannon's stomach. She carefully approached the area, leaning forward to see in the daylight. Sure enough, shards of broken glass glinted among the blades of grass, spread across a space about 10 feet wide. Some chunks were large, others almost powder-fine, and all potentially deadly to rubber wheelchair tires, and hazardous to anyone on foot. A surge of anger and dismay welled up in Shannon. She glanced at Valerie's house, half expecting to see the woman's stern face glaring from behind a curtain. There was no sign of movement. Mr. Pellman patted Shannon's shoulder gently. "I'll help you, dear. Let's find a broom or something. We can't leave this here." Nodding, Shannon blinked back tears. "Thank you. I can't believe someone would do this. It's so cruel." They alerted a few other neighbors who lived nearby. Soon, a small group arrived with brooms, dustpans, and thick gloves. Shannon hovered at the edge, feeling gratitude for their help, but also a deep sense of violation. This wasn't just random vandalism. It felt targeted, an attempt to keep her from crossing. She suspected Valerie, but had no proof except Mr. Pellman's partial glimpse in the dark. The cleanup proved tedious. Tiny shards were embedded in the soil, forcing volunteers to kneel and pick them out carefully. After an hour, the group had filled 2 small buckets with glass fragments. Yet they couldn't be sure they'd removed every sliver. Some likely remained hidden in the grass. Shannon worried that even a single piece could flatten a tire. While they worked, a neighbor named Gina Brown muttered, "What kind of monster would do this? We have kids who run around barefoot sometimes, or dogs who might walk here." Shannon nodded, her voice tight. "It's so dangerous." Finally, they cleared as much as they could. Shannon tested the area cautiously, rolling her chair forward a few feet. The volunteers guided her to avoid any suspicious glimmer. She made it across without incident, though her heart pounded the entire time. That evening, Lucy Ramirez and some of the same volunteers returned with a shop vac, vacuuming the grass in an attempt to remove any lingering shards. Though it was an unorthodox approach, they wanted to be thorough. No one should fear hidden glass. In the wake of the incident, Shannon felt torn. Should she confront Valerie directly? Should she file a police report? Without concrete evidence, it seemed risky to point fingers. Mr. Pellman hadn't seen Valerie's face, just a silhouette. Yet everyone suspected the same person. If so, it meant her neighbor had deliberately set a trap for her wheelchair, an act that went beyond petty. It was malicious. Shannon spent a sleepless night, unsettled by the realization that she was being targeted. She resolved that she wouldn't let fear or intimidation stop her from using that path if she needed it. But she also worried about her safety. What if there was a repeat trap? News of the broken glass spread through Maple Grove in the following days. While not everyone knew the full context, many felt alarmed and outraged. The idea that someone had deliberately scattered sharp debris on common land was shocking. Some parents insisted on checking the grass themselves to ensure their kids or pets wouldn't be harmed. Meanwhile, a quiet wave of sympathy built for Shannon. She was relatively new to the neighborhood but had always been pleasant, never causing any trouble except, apparently, for the crime of taking a shortcut. Lucy, Gina, Mr. Pellman, and a few others decided enough was enough. They wanted to help Shannon secure that route, legitimize it as a recognized footpath so that no one could sabotage it again. One evening, a small group gathered at Lucy's house to discuss how to proceed. Shannon, Lucy, Mr. Pellman, Gina, and a couple named Eric and Martina Feldman who were known for their involvement in local activism. They spread out a copy of the Maple Grove layout, highlighting the grassy strip and its location relative to Valerie's property. Gina spoke first. If we can persuade the HOA to designate that strip as an official walkway, maybe they'll pave it or at least maintain it. Then no one can claim it's unauthorized. Shannon nodded. That would be ideal. I'd gladly pitch in for materials if cost is an issue. Even a simple paved path or gravel route would help me, and hopefully no one else would sabotage it. But how do we get the HOA on board? Eric shrugged. Valerie's on the HOA board, right? She'll fight it. But the rest of them might side with us if enough residents make noise. Martina added, we can gather signatures. People are outraged about the glass. If we explain that this path helps Shannon and other neighbors, and that will do our part to keep it neat, we might sway the board. Mr. Pellman tapped the table. I saw someone out there that night, and I'm convinced it was Valerie. Even if we can't prove it legally, we can highlight that sabotage. The board should see that if they don't act, we risk more trouble. Thus, they planned a multi-pronged approach. Draft a petition requesting the HOA to formalize a small path on that easement, ensuring it meets accessibility standards. Publicly condemn the broken glass incident at the next HOA meeting. Offer partial funding or volunteer labor from neighbors, showcasing broad support. Shannon felt simultaneously emboldened and anxious. She'd moved here for peace, not conflict. Yet she couldn't stand aside while someone tried to chase her off with dangerous tactics. If they succeeded in upgrading the path, not only would she be safer, but others might benefit too. Parents with strollers, kids on bikes, anyone wanting a more direct route to the pond. That thought gave her hope. When Valerie caught wind of the petition forming, she bristled. She discovered it through an email thread that circulated among residents asking for signatures. The subject line read, Safe Path Initiative, protect our neighbors and keep Maple Grove accessible. As she read the details, how neighbors wanted the HOA to create a small paved or graveled walkway behind her fence, her frustration flared like a brush fire. From Valerie's perspective, this was the ultimate affront. Not only was Shannon continuing to cross near her yard, but now she sought official sanction that would legitimize the route forever. If the HOA approved it, Valerie would be forced to endure a stream of passers-by behind her fence. She envisioned noise, trash, and a loss of privacy. Never mind that the land wasn't strictly hers. As anger roiled within her, Valerie decided to double down. She typed up a letter to the HOA board. Subject: Opposition to proposed pathway. Dear board members, I am writing to express my staunch opposition to the so-called Safe Path Initiative. This plan would jeopardize homeowner privacy and degrade our neighborhood aesthetic. Furthermore, any new walkway behind my property poses a liability risk if someone is injured. I strongly urge the board to reject this misguided proposal and uphold our community standards. Sincerely, Valerie Jefferson, HOA board member. She also distributed flyers, door to door, warning about the dangers of an unnecessary walkway. The flyers alleged that it would attract loiterers, cause property values to drop, and lead to more landscaping costs. Few neighbors took the flyers seriously, though, especially after hearing Shannon's situation. Meanwhile, the petition continued to gain steam. Lucy, Gina, and the Feldmans managed to collect over 100 signatures, both from those who sympathized with Shannon and those who simply despised the idea of malicious sabotage. The broken glass incident cast a dark shadow, and many believed an official walkway was the best solution to prevent future harm. Valerie fumed. She considered using the same tactic again, spreading more glass or some other deterrent, but realized the neighborhood was watching closely now. If the path was cleaned and people were on the lookout, her sabotage might be caught on camera. She didn't want to risk that. Instead, she plotted a more direct confrontation with Shannon. A few days before the upcoming HOA meeting, where the Safe Path initiative was set to be discussed, Shannon found Valerie waiting for her near the pond. It was early morning, and dew glistened on the grass. Shannon was returning from a short spin around the water when Valerie stepped forward, blocking her route back toward the grassy strip. "Why are you doing this?" Valerie demanded, voice taut. "I told you repeatedly to stay off that land. Now you want a permanent walkway." Shannon inhaled deeply. "I'm simply exercising my right to use an easement. And yes, after what happened with the glass, we feel a safer route would help everyone. It's not just about me." Valerie's eyes flashed. "That's exactly my point. It's not just about you. You're inviting more foot traffic behind my fence, destroying the peace of my backyard. You're making a mountain out of a molehill." Shannon's voice trembled with contained frustration. "Ma'am, I am not the one who scattered broken glass. That was a literal, life-threatening trap. The only reason we're pushing for an official path is to prevent someone from trying it again." For a moment, guilt flickered across Valerie's features, though she quickly masked it. "You can't prove who did that. Maybe it was teenagers or some hooligans from outside Maple Grove." Shannon eyed her. "Right. Regardless, you seem determined to block me. If we had a designated path, sabotage would be less likely." Valerie stepped closer, her voice low. "Well, I oppose this so-called improvement, and I'll fight it at the meeting. If you're smart, you'll drop this and find another route." Despite a tremor of fear, Shannon lifted her chin. "I can't. I shouldn't have to. I have a right to move around safely like anyone else. And the neighbors agree." With that, she maneuvered around Valerie, who stood rigid with anger. Shannon's pulse pounded, but she refused to show intimidation. Rolling away, she heard Valerie mutter something that sounded like, "You'll regret this." Shannon didn't respond. She vowed to stand firm at the HOA meeting, no matter how bitterly Valerie opposed her. The monthly HOA meeting typically drew a modest crowd, mostly board members and a few homeowners concerned about specific issues. But word of the broken glass incident and the proposed walkway had spread, prompting an unusually large turnout. Chairs in the community center filled quickly, and extra seats were brought out. At the front of the room sat the board, President Karen Marshall, somewhat confusingly, a different Karen by name, though not the Karen neighbor in question, Treasurer Alan Brooks, Secretary Paula Jennings, and two other members, one of them Valerie Jefferson herself. They followed a set agenda, wading through minor matters like lawn maintenance schedules and an upcoming neighborhood picnic. But the real tension centered on the last agenda item, Safe Path Initiative. When they reached that topic, the board invited Shannon Lee and her supporters to speak. Shannon felt a wave of nervous energy, but Lucy stepped up beside her. Gina, Mr. Pellman, and the Feldmans stood close behind, forming a small show of solidarity. Clearing her throat, Shannon began. "Good evening. My name is Shannon Lee. I recently moved to Maple Grove, and I'm in a wheelchair. I rely on a small strip of common land behind Ms. Jefferson's fence to access the pond path. As many of you know, someone scattered broken glass there, endangering not only me, but anyone else passing by, adults, children, pets. That's why we're proposing a safer, more accessible route." Lucy took over, explaining the petition. Over 100 neighbors have signed this, requesting the HOA formalize a short, paved walkway or a firm, well-maintained path. This would benefit residents who use strollers, bikes, or have mobility challenges. When they finished, the board opened the floor to comments. Several neighbors spoke in favor, mentioning that they too found the route helpful or that they hated to see Shannon endangered. The mood was strongly supportive. Finally, Valerie rose to present her opposing view. With a stack of papers in hand, she launched into a speech about property values, loss of privacy, and misuse of HOA resources. She argued that the path's creation would require funds better spent elsewhere. She also claimed that noise, litter, and potential vandalism might increase behind her fence. Notably, she did not mention the broken glass, nor show any sympathy for Shannon's needs. A wave of murmured disagreement swept the room. People seemed unmoved by Valerie's alarmist claims. Even board president Karen Marshall frowned, flipping through the petition with interest. Secretary Paula Jennings asked gently, "Ms. Jefferson, do you have any evidence that the path would reduce property values or invite vandalism? We haven't seen that with our other sidewalks." Valerie stiffened. "I just know it will create problems. My yard is right there. I'll be the one dealing with the consequences." Treasurer Alan Brooks interjected, "But Ms. Lee's problem is real. She's faced sabotage, broken glass. That's not hypothetical. We can't ignore the safety aspect, especially for someone in a wheelchair." He glanced at Shannon, then at the petition supporters. "I'd rather see us accommodate a genuinely needed route than worry about purely speculative concerns." The audience erupted in applause. Valerie's face reddened. She tried to muster a rebuttal, but the momentum clearly favored Shannon. In a final blow to Valerie's position, Derek Simpson, who had quietly opposed her in the past, stood up and addressed the board. "The cost for a short paved or gravel path is manageable, and volunteers have offered to help. We can incorporate simple landscaping so it looks neat. This is about building a more inclusive neighborhood. I move that we vote on approving the Safe Path Initiative." Karen Marshall nodded. "All right, all in favor." She raised her hand. Immediately, four board members followed suit. Valerie alone kept her hand down. The motion carried overwhelmingly. Cheers filled the room, and Shannon exhaled in relief. The board agreed to finalize details over the coming weeks: materials, budget, volunteer assignments. By the time the crowd dispersed, the walkway had essentially been approved. Valerie looked stricken, as though she'd lost a personal battle. In truth, she had. The sabotage and her attempts to block Shannon had backfired in the most public way. Over the next month, Maple Grove buzzed with activity as neighbors prepared for the new path's construction. The board arranged for a small budget allocation to cover basic materials: gravel, paving stones, a bit of topsoil for leveling, and a modest wooden fence to line the edges. They also authorized adding motion sensor lights along the route, ensuring that any future mischief, like smashing bottles, would be clearly illuminated. Volunteers turned out in impressive numbers. Families, seniors, teens, and even children helped with tasks like clearing weeds, smoothing the ground, and marking where the walkway would lie. Shannon contributed too, in whatever way she could. Though she couldn't do heavy lifting, she offered drinks, snacks, and plenty of gratitude. Lucy joked that Shannon was the project manager, overseeing each step from her wheelchair. Some neighbors paused to watch the progress, marveling at how the broken glass incident had inspired such unity. Gina was especially vocal. What was meant to harm ended up improving the entire neighborhood. That's what can happen when good people stand together. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in Valerie's house was glacial. She watched through narrowed blinds as the path took shape behind her fence. She tried to lodge further objections, citing noise or unauthorized fence height, but the board dismissed them. One day, she confronted a group of volunteers, snapping photos on her phone and threatening to call code enforcement if they went beyond the authorized boundary. Lucy calmly informed her that everything was pre-approved by the HOA. Valerie had no grounds to stop them. The final blow came when the board decided to finance the purchase of a small, low fence along the perimeter. It would mark the path clearly, preventing people from wandering into Valerie's yard, even by accident. They even planned to plant shrubs that would add a bit of privacy. Ironically, the net effect would also keep the path safer from sabotage. Any broken glass or other hazards would be much easier to notice on a defined walkway. Valerie realized, with bitterness, that she couldn't continue her covert tactics without risk of immediate detection. As the path neared completion, rumors swirled that the HOA might also address the cost of the glass cleanup. Shannon's volunteers had spent time and resources, but the HOA could impose fines or demand repayment if they identified the culprit. People strongly suspected Valerie, though no one had caught her red-handed. Mr. Pellman's nighttime sighting was the closest thing to a witness statement, but he hadn't seen Valerie's face. The HOA board discussed what to do. Eventually, an incident changed the equation. One morning, while walking her dog near the new path, Gina spotted Valerie sullenly picking up small rocks and tossing them onto the path. It wasn't as dangerous as broken glass, but it suggested an attempt to create obstacles. Gina confronted her. Valerie hastily denied wrongdoing and fled, but Gina snapped a photo showing Valerie mid-throw. It was enough to raise suspicion that she was tampering with the new walkway. Gina took the photo to the board. It didn't prove Valerie had scattered the original glass, but it was clear she was interfering with the path's safety again. Furious, the board summoned Valerie to a special meeting. There, they grilled her about the glass incident and her repeated efforts to sabotage the path. Faced with the photo of her throwing rocks, Valerie had little defense. The board threatened to remove her from her position if any further misconduct occurred. They also insisted she pay for the glass cleanup. Since the incident happened near her property, and she'd clearly tried to hamper the path's use more than once, they held her financially responsible for the volunteers' costs, bags, brooms, disposal fees, plus compensating for the hours spent vacuuming shards. Though the direct evidence tying her to the glass was circumstantial, the board felt the pattern was undeniable. Cornered, Valerie bristled. She threatened legal action, but her protests rang hollow. The board was done tolerating her bullying. In a final blow, the president stated that if any future sabotage occurred, they would turn over all evidence to local authorities, potentially leading to criminal charges. Valerie had no choice but to pay the cleaning bill, an amount not exorbitant, but symbolic of her forced accountability. She left the meeting in a fury. Word spread that Karen got a comeuppance, and many neighbors felt a triumphant sense of justice. Shannon, though never vindictive by nature, admitted privately to Lucy that she was relieved the HOA had taken a stand. At least now she can't keep targeting me. If she tries, they'll have the lights and the fence, and hopefully cameras soon. With Valerie's sabotage halted, the walkway project wrapped up smoothly. The final result was modest but appealing. A gently sloping path of compacted gravel, with a short wooden border on each side and a line of solar-powered motion sensor lights. When dusk fell, the lights glowed softly, illuminating the route that curved around Valerie's fence and connected to the pond trail. A small sign marked the entrance. Accessible path, Maple Grove HOA. Please keep it clean and enjoy safely. Shannon was the first to test it formally, rolling her wheelchair along the smooth gravel. She found it far easier than the old grass route. No longer did she worry about mud or hidden shards. She could travel safely to the pond, day or night. A small crowd of neighbors watched, applauding lightly. Even some older folks with canes tried it, remarking how much more stable the surface felt than uneven grass. A few parents with strollers discovered it was a shortcut to the pond that saved them time, too. That evening, a handful of neighbors decided to celebrate with a simple ribbon-cutting ceremony. They used a length of bright ribbon at the path's entrance. Lucy gave a short speech, thanking everyone for their support. She singled out Shannon for her courage in standing up for her rights, and the volunteers who had donated time and materials. The group then cheered as Shannon rolled forward, cutting the ribbon with a pair of scissors someone held out for her. It was a small, heartfelt moment that captured the communal spirit. Throughout it all, Valerie's house remained dark. She had pulled her blinds tight, refusing to witness the walkway's official unveiling. Whether out of anger, shame, or both, she made no appearance. Some neighbors whispered that she might move away, given how the rest of Maple Grove had turned against her. Others speculated she'd stay, too proud to admit defeat. In any case, the day belonged to Shannon and those who championed an inclusive neighborhood. In the weeks following the path's completion, life in Maple Grove took on a calmer rhythm. Shannon used her route without incident. Residents chatted more frequently while strolling the new path, some with dogs, others just to enjoy the sunset. Even local teens occasionally used it for a shortcut, though they carefully avoided making noise near Valerie's fence, aware of her temper. Valerie, on the other hand, found herself increasingly isolated. Where once she patrolled the streets with a clipboard, chiding neighbors for minor infractions, she now retreated. A swirl of rumors pinned the broken glass scandal on her, painting her as heartless. Officially, the HOA stated that an unnamed party had reimbursed the volunteers for cleanup costs, but everyone knew it was Valerie. People saw the extra fence and lights, recognizing it as a direct result of her sabotage attempts. When she did appear in public, rarely, neighbors greeted her with awkward silence or curt nods. The sense of community spirit that had blossomed in the wake of the sabotage only highlighted her alienation. Valerie tried to maintain a stoic front, telling herself she was the victim of a smear campaign. But the truth was, she had lost credibility. The day someone discovered her lobbing stones onto the half-finished path was the day her neighbors collectively turned against her. One afternoon, she spotted Shannon rolling down the path from her window. The motion sensor lights flicked on under the shade of a large oak, even in the dim daylight. Valerie's stomach twisted at the sight of the official sign, the neatly laid gravel, proof that the community embraced something she had fought so vehemently. A flicker of remorse passed through her. Did I go too far? She wondered. That pang of conscience, however, was not enough to spur a public apology. Pride, or stubbornness, anchored her in place. While Valerie stewed, the rest of Maple Grove found renewed unity. The same volunteers who worked on the path soon banded together for other improvement projects, repainting faded benches around the pond, organizing a little free library near the community center, and hosting a neighborhood picnic that welcomed both longtime residents and newcomers like Shannon. Shannon herself became more involved in HOA discussions, offering a voice for accessibility. With Lucy by her side, she proposed small changes, like curb cuts and wider sidewalks in certain spots, that would help not just her, but parents pushing strollers and seniors using walkers. Inspired by how the Path project turned out, the HOA embraced these ideas, fueling a sense of positivity across the neighborhood. Shannon was especially grateful to see how the walkway was benefiting others. Kids on bikes used it as a fun shortcut. Older neighbors with canes found it easier than the steep sidewalk. Even Ms. Fletcher, a retiree with mild arthritis, told Shannon that the gentle slope saved her knees from unnecessary strain. In short, the path had become a symbol of Maple Grove's progress toward a more inclusive and neighborly place. As for the broken glass incident, it remained an unpleasant memory but served as a catalyst for that progress. People whispered that it was Valerie's doing, yet seldom spoke her name. Shannon occasionally felt uneasy, wondering if Valerie might strike again. But with the motion sensor lights and the watchful eyes of the community, it seemed unlikely. Maple Grove had collectively decided they wouldn't tolerate sabotage or intimidation. Months later, Shannon rolled along the path under the golden light of a summer sunset. The gravel had compacted nicely, forming a smooth, reliable surface. The fence line was adorned with flowering shrubs that had grown taller, providing both a pleasant view and privacy for Valerie's yard. The motion sensor lights winked on as dusk settled, ensuring everyone could traverse the path safely after dark. Stopping her wheelchair at the midpoint, close to Valerie's fence, Shannon gazed at the little sign, reminding residents to keep the path clean. A sense of gratitude filled her heart. When she first moved here, she never dreamed she'd spark a large-scale improvement project. The ordeal with the broken glass had been terrifying, but the support she found in her neighbors overshadowed the ugliness. Across the fence, Valerie stood in her own backyard, fiddling with a garden hose. Shannon glimpsed her through a gap in the boards. They locked eyes for a fleeting second. Shannon considered waving, but Valerie turned away, disappearing behind her rose bushes. In that silent exchange, Shannon sensed that an unspoken truce had formed. Valerie no longer confronted her, and Shannon no longer feared sabotage. The community's newly forged spirit served as a shield against further hostility. On weekends, families could be seen strolling up and down the path. Some paused to chat with Shannon if they crossed paths. Lucy and Gina sometimes set up a lemonade stand for charity at the pond's edge, drawing passers-by to gather and socialize. Eric and Martina Feldman started a small green initiative, planting native flowers near the walkway to encourage pollinators. The synergy continued, weaving Maple Grove into a closer-knit neighborhood than before. Looking back, Shannon realized that if Valerie had simply left her alone, the path would have remained a humble patch of grass. Ironically, The sabotage with broken glass had triggered an unstoppable wave of empathy and action. The fiasco ended not with Shannon forced to find a new route, but with a robust, well-lit walkway that validated her presence and served everyone. Even the HOA, once known for nitpicky restrictions, found fresh purpose in championing inclusive improvements. In that sense, Valerie's final act of maliciousness had paradoxically nurtured Maple Grove's transformation. Sometimes, adversity exposes a community's hidden strengths: kindness, collaboration, and the will to stand up for what's right. The newly constructed path stood as an enduring testament to how a single cruel deed could be turned on its head, leading to a lasting legacy of shared benefit. Shannon took a final look at the glow of the motion sensor lights flickering on beneath the darkening sky. She steered her wheelchair onward, smiling softly to herself. Behind her, the path remained open and welcoming, a symbol that Maple Grove, despite its flaws, had grown into a place where neighbors truly cared. And though Valerie, Karen, Jefferson might never concede defeat, she was now powerless to stop the bright, barrier-free future that the neighborhood had embraced with open arms.